Langston Myles had spent 10 quiet years as the only black teacher at one of America's most elite prep schools. No one cared until the day he gave a white billionaire's son a B. Suddenly whispers became accusations. His gradebook was questioned, and a powerful mother declared, "People like him don't get to decide futures." What no one saw coming was the proof he held in his hand, evidence that would shatter her legacy and expose the school's darkest secret. But the question was, would the world believe a black teacher over a wealthy name? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. No one ever said it out loud, but there were facts that lived in silence. At Crestmore Academy, an elite private school nestled deep in the wealthiest corner of Brookside County, excellence wasn't just expected, it was purchased. Generational wealth passed down like heirlooms. School admissions greased by endowments and last names etched in granite outside the science wing. The air itself carried the scent of legacy and exclusion. The faculty lounge was filled with polished resumes, alumni connections, and quiet, inherited authority. Among over 90 faculty members, there was only one black teacher.
Langston Myles.
He didn't advertise it, and no one ever brought it up. Not directly, but it was there, like a spotlight only he could feel. Langston had earned his position. Masters from Columbia, undergraduate honors from Howard, published essays, recommendations so glowing they embarrassed him. But at Crestmore, where the majority of teachers had private school pedigrees and country club memberships, his credentials didn't make him belong. They made him exceptional, and exceptional was never comfortable. He taught American literature to juniors and seniors. In his classroom, fiction bled into truth. Stories weren't just analyzed, they were dissected, challenged, reassembled. He taught Baldwin next to Fitzgerald, Morrison alongside Twain. He dared to ask whose story was missing from the canon. Some parents appreciated his style, others tolerated it, most ignored him, until the day he gave a B to Spencer Alton III. That's when they started to notice. Spencer was Crestmore royalty. Blonde, lacrosse captain, perfectly postured. His grandfather's name was carved into the library's stone facade. His mother, Genevieve Alton, chaired the school's donor board. His father, a corporate attorney with connections to the state legislature, had once been called the future of conservative politics. Langston had graded Spencer's final paper, a comparative analysis between The Great Gatsby and Between the World and Me, with rigorous attention. The ideas were shallow, the analysis was derivative, the paper leaned on AI tools, and Langston could tell. Spencer cited 3 articles incorrectly, misquoted Baldwin, and missed the entire nuance of Ta-Nehisi Coates' argument. Still, Langston gave him a B. Generous, but fair. The next day, the air in the hallway felt different. Cold stares from students, a hollow silence in the teacher's lounge. His inbox had a single email, marked urgent, from Headmaster Burke. "Please come see me before lunch." Genevieve Alton had called. She didn't ask questions. She gave ultimatums. According to Headmaster Burke, her exact words were, "My son does not get Bs, especially not in classes like that." Langston didn't flinch. "Classes like what?" The headmaster shifted in his chair. "You know what she meant?" He did. Langston left the meeting with no promise of support, only a suggestion. "Maybe reconsider your grading rubric. Some of the parents have certain expectations." That evening, Langston sat alone in his classroom. Lights off, blinds half shut. He reread Spencer's paper again. He wasn't doubting the grade. He was doubting the ground under his feet. For years he had kept his head down, avoided confrontation, chosen professionalism over protest. But now it wasn't about a grade. It was about visibility. They hadn't noticed him before. Not really. He had existed in their system quietly, efficiently, respectably. But now, the moment he touched the status quo, he became visible, and a problem. 2 days later, a complaint was formally filed. Genevieve claimed Langston had shown bias, that his grading targeted Spencer unfairly, and that the material assigned in class didn't reflect the school's traditional values. Her words were sharp, polished, and purposefully ambiguous, just enough to sound legitimate, while dripping with implication. Langston wasn't worried. At first, he had proof. Rubrics. Student feedback. Years of glowing reviews. No disciplinary history. A consistent grading pattern. But facts, he would soon learn, were no match for perception when the right people controlled the narrative. Other teachers stopped making small talk. One even whispered, Why poke the bear? He didn't respond. He wanted to believe the school would do the right thing. But the walls were starting to close in. The first student dropped out of his advanced lit class a week later. Then 3 more. Parents cited academic misalignment and uncomfortable topics. All of them came from the same social circle. All of them white. Langston tried not to take it personally. But it was personal. Every withdrawal felt like a warning. You don't belong here. And yet he stayed. He showed up. He taught. He smiled, even when it ached. His remaining students, especially the quieter ones, the ones who didn't come from money, leaned in close. One of them, a black girl named Amaya, stayed after class and said, "You're the first teacher who makes me feel like I'm not crazy for seeing the things I see." He thanked her. And for a moment, that was enough. Until a week later, the Altons escalated things. A rumor began circling that Langston had pressured Spencer during office hours, that he had created an unsafe learning environment. There were no witnesses, no proof, just whispers, and a single anonymous complaint filed with the Board of Trustees. Langston received a call late one evening from a private number. It was Dr. Patel, an old mentor now working at another prep school across the state. "I'm hearing things, Langston. They're trying to paint you as aggressive." Langston sighed. "Because I gave a B." Dr. Patel paused. "Because you're the one who gave it." Langston sat still for a long time. After hanging up, he didn't eat dinner. He didn't sleep. He just sat at his desk, looking at the red pen marks on Spencer's paper. Proof of everything. And yet, in this system, proof meant nothing. The next morning, his school laptop had been remotely locked out. A cold email followed. "Pending review of recent concerns. Your classroom access has been temporarily suspended." He hadn't even been told what he was accused of. Langston stared at the locked screen, heart pounding. The message was clear. They were building a case. But what he didn't know yet was that someone in the school had been secretly recording meetings. And soon, those recordings would surface, revealing far more than he expected. The email that changed everything arrived at 6:47 a.m., just as dawn was painting the classroom windows with pale gold. Langston Myles sat at his desk, reviewing lesson plans, when the subject line caught his eye. Formal concern, student evaluation and professional conduct. He opened it slowly, already sensing its venom. The message wasn't from the headmaster this time. It was from Genevieve Alton herself. Her tone was pristine, rehearsed and drenched in superiority. "Mr. Myles, my son Spencer has always been an exceptional student. His academic record speaks for itself. Your grading of his recent paper appears inconsistent with his usual performance and with the standards Crestmore upholds. We are concerned this evaluation may reflect a personal bias or misunderstanding of our son's capabilities. We trust this matter will be handled with the discretion it deserves. Genevieve Alton." It was a message crafted like a dagger, polite enough to sound civil, sharp enough to pierce authority. Langston knew what it meant. He wasn't being questioned about a grade. He was being accused of stepping out of line. At 8:10, she appeared. Genevieve Alton arrived at Crestmore the way people like her entered any space. As if the air itself parted out of respect, pearls at her throat, a beige coat perfectly tailored, and that calm, brittle smile of someone used to control. The receptionist, nervous, buzzed Langston's classroom. "Mr. Myles? Mrs. Alton would like a word." When she entered, she didn't look around. She didn't take in the bookshelves, lined with Baldwin, Morrison and Ellison, or the hand-drawn literary timelines on the wall. Her eyes went straight to him, assessing, measuring. "Mr. Myles," she began, her voice honeyed with contempt. "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding." Langston stood, professional, composed. "Mrs. Alton, I'm always open to discussing student performance. Spencer's paper didn't meet the analytical standards She cut him off, leaning slightly closer. "I don't think you understand what I'm saying. My son has never received a B. Not once. We expect consistency." Langston's voice softened but held steady. "With respect, grades aren't inherited, Mrs. Alton. They're earned." For the first time, her smile flickered. "Is that supposed to mean something?" "It means I grade based on merit, not reputation." She blinked, offended. "Reputation?" Langston held her gaze. The paper lacked original analysis. It relied too heavily on surface comparisons. Genevieve's voice sharpened. "Are you suggesting my son is incapable of deep analysis?" "I'm saying he can do better, and that's what the grade reflects." There was silence. the kind that stretched and stung. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I've been part of this school for 16 years, Mr. Myles. My family's donations helped build this department. I'm sure you understand how things work here. Langston didn't flinch. I understand fairness. I'm afraid that's all I can offer. Her eyes hardened. Fairness, she repeated, tasting the word like poison. Is that what you call it? She turned to leave, her heels clicking with precision. Just before exiting, she paused by the door. That grade, she said quietly, is an insult to my family's reputation. And then she left. By the next morning, word had spread through faculty channels like spilled ink. Mrs. Alton had met with the board chair, the headmaster and 2 trustees. She had even called the local education liaison, citing concerns about racial bias in grading. It was almost brilliant, how quickly she flipped the script. Langston wasn't sure which stung more, her accusation or the school's silence. No one asked for his side. No one defended him. The same administrators who once called him a role model now avoided eye contact. During the staff meeting that week, Headmaster Burke cleared his throat and made a vague announcement about maintaining alignment with community expectations. Everyone knew who he meant. Later in the hallway, Mrs. Crenshaw from history whispered, "You should have just given him the A. You know how she is." Langston smiled weakly. And what lesson would that teach him? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That Friday, Spencer himself appeared after class. His usual swagger was gone. He stood near the door, awkward, defensive. "My mom's kind of upset," he muttered. Langston nodded. "I figured. She says you're, being hard on me." Langston gestured toward the empty desk across from him. "Sit." Spencer hesitated, then obeyed. Langston slid the paper across the desk. "You wrote this paragraph about Gatsby and Coates. You said they both chased impossible dreams, wealth and acceptance. You compared them as equals, but you didn't notice the difference in what they were chasing. Gatsby chose illusion. Coates described survival." Spencer frowned. "So I just got it wrong?" "No," Langston said softly. "You didn't see far enough, and that's what learning is. Seeing further." Spencer looked at the paper again. For a second he seemed to understand. "She won't see it that way." Langston smiled, tired but kind. "Then that's her lesson, not yours." By Monday the storm had worsened. Langston received a copy of a formal grievance, filed against him. 5 pages of carefully curated language, claiming cultural insensitivity, lack of transparency, and questionable professionalism. Attached was a petition, digitally signed by 12 parents. The last name on the list hit him hardest, Crenshaw. The same colleague who'd whispered to him in sympathy had signed it too. He sat in his classroom that evening, staring at the signatures, feeling the weight of each one like stones on his chest. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of having to explain his intentions. Tired of navigating egos and expectations that would never apply to anyone else. When he finally stood up, the hallway was dark and silent. But as he walked past the bulletin board, something new caught his eye. A printed notice for a special board session. Staff conduct review. His name wasn't listed, but he didn't need it to be. He knew. That night, as he sat at home grading quietly, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in your lane." No name. No signature. Just that. Langston stared at it, the chill crawling under his skin. Who had sent it? A parent? A student? A colleague? He didn't know. He deleted it, but it didn't leave him. When he returned to school the next morning, something in the air had shifted. Conversation stopped when he walked into the lounge. Someone had rearranged his desk drawers. A photo frame, the one of him and his late mother, had been turned face down. He looked around, quiet, steady. He said nothing. But inside, something had changed. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about a grade. It was about erasure. Subtle, deliberate, and complete. That afternoon, Headmaster Burke requested a closed-door discussion with Langston and the Altons. But as Langston walked toward the meeting room, he caught a glimpse of the assistant principal slipping a small recording device into her folder. And in that moment, he realized someone wasn't planning to play fair. The meeting room was small, sterile, and far too quiet. Langston entered with a sense of calm he didn't entirely feel. His shoulders were squared, his steps measured. He had come prepared with a printed grading rubric, annotated student work, and years of untouched credibility behind him. But when he saw who was already seated, Genevieve Alton, Spencer, Headmaster Burke and 2 board trustees, he realized this wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. Genevieve barely looked up from her folder. Her son, quiet and avoidant, fidgeted with a Mont Blanc pen. Burke offered a thin smile that vanished before Langston could return it. One of the trustees, a balding man with an engraved watch, asked the first question without introduction. "Mr. Myles, can you explain why you chose to assign Spencer Alton a grade that deviates significantly from his academic history?" Langston breathed in once, then again, because his paper did not meet the standards of critical analysis outlined in the syllabus. "I apply the same rubric to every student. Spencer is no exception." Genevieve's voice sliced in. "You say that as if he hasn't consistently maintained a 4.0 GPA since middle school." Langston turned to her. "Grades are not cumulative. They're not a reflection of legacy. They're based on current work, current understanding. That's what I assessed." She closed her folder. "This isn't just about one paper, Mr. Myles. This is about your tone in class, the text you assign, the political slant of your discussions." Langston blinked. "Political slant?" "The other parents agree," she continued, now looking to the trustees for affirmation. "You've built a curriculum around trauma narratives and revisionist history. My son comes home questioning whether his family is complicit in some grand social crime. That's not education. That's indoctrination." Langston leaned forward. "Is it indoctrination to teach Coates, Baldwin, Angelo? Or is it uncomfortable because it challenges the lens through which this school views American literature?" Burke cleared his throat, uneasy. "We're not questioning your credentials, Mr. Myles. Only your judgment. Perhaps a lighter touch would be more appropriate in our environment." Langston stared at him. "I was hired for my expertise, not to pander to discomfort." The room went cold. That night, the emails began to leak. Not from Langston, but from the parent chain. An anonymous source had begun forwarding the thread to select faculty members. One of them, brave or reckless, sent it to Langston. What he read stunned him. They weren't just questioning his grading. They were questioning his motives. One message read, "We didn't pay $40 a year for our children to be made to feel ashamed of their history. This teacher is pushing a racial agenda." Another, "If we let this go unchecked, next thing you know they'll be rewriting our entire curriculum around slavery and oppression. And worse, he's clearly got a chip on his shoulder. Reverse racism is real. And this is proof." Langston sat still, the words staining him like smoke. It wasn't about the grade. It never had been. It was about control, about preserving a narrative, one in which people like him were only acceptable so long as they didn't disturb the room. He had disturbed it, and now the room wanted him gone. By the end of the week, the campaign had gone beyond email. Genevieve hosted a concerned parents' gathering at her estate, ostensibly to discuss academic direction. In reality, it was a coordinated assault on Langston's career. Photos from the event surfaced on Facebook. Dozens of well-dressed parents mingled with wine glasses, sharing their grievances under soft lighting. One caption read, "Protecting our children's education from divisive ideology." That same weekend, a blog post appeared under a pseudonym, "When Teachers Cross the Line." It accused Langston of fostering racial resentment, of teaching activist literature, and of singling out white students during discussions. Langston recognized the phrasing. It echoed Genevieve's complaints almost word for word. The post spread fast, first through the PTA network, then to local forums. Suddenly, he wasn't just a teacher. He was a problem, a threat. The following Monday, Langston was pulled from his afternoon class. No warning, just an administrative assistant delivering a note. "Report to HR immediately." In the HR office, the temperature dropped. A lawyer was present. She introduced herself but didn't smile. Papers were placed in front of him, formal notifications of an internal investigation. The allegations included creating a hostile environment, exhibiting racial bias, and failure to adhere to pedagogical balance. Langston asked one question: "What does pedagogical balance mean in this context?" No one answered. He was told he would be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. When he returned to his classroom to gather his belongings, a custodian was already boxing his desk. But Langston wasn't alone. 3 students, Amaya, Elijah, and Sophia, waited in the hallway. Their eyes were red, their jaws tight. "You didn't do anything wrong," Amaya whispered. Sophia handed him something. A small notebook. Inside were handwritten letters from over a dozen students, each one thanking him, telling him how he had changed the way they read, thought, saw the world. Elijah said, "They're scared of the truth you taught us." Langston nodded slowly. "Then maybe we taught them something too." He walked out, box in hand, but head high. 3 days later, an anonymous envelope arrived at his apartment. Inside, a printed transcript of a board meeting, a copy of a confidential donor email exchange, a photo of Genevieve Alton whispering to Headmaster Burke before a school event. Someone on the inside had begun documenting everything. The transcript included a disturbing exchange. "Trustee, if we let this man set the tone, we'll have parents pulling donations. Burke, he's a great teacher, but optics matter. We don't want controversy. Genevieve, I told you he wasn't a good fit. Now it's your problem." Langston's hands trembled as he read it. This wasn't just a smear, it was orchestration. They had built a case against him not because he was wrong, but because he had threatened their comfort. What Langston didn't know was that someone else was watching. Miss Tilda Reyes, the assistant principal, had grown tired of Crestmore's double standards. She had started recording closed-door meetings weeks earlier, suspicious of how disciplinary decisions seemed to shift based on last names and skin tones. And now she had hours of footage, hours of evidence. She wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Not until she could protect herself. But she was about to become Langston's unexpected ally. As Langston stood on his porch that evening, debating whether to fight back or disappear, his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It read, "Meet me tomorrow. I have recordings that will change everything." Langston Myles had walked into the hall of the prestigious school with dignity and hope. He believed in teaching, in opening eyes, in encouraging students to ask more than memorize. But now, standing beneath the high ceilings of Crestmore Academy, he realized the fight before him was bigger than one paper or one parent. It was pointing to an entire system built to protect people like Genevieve Alton, shielded by wealth, legacy, and influence, while silently excluding people like him. The first sign came during the preliminary review meeting. The panel was polite, but then the tone shifted. A soft question about student comfort led into a comment about maintaining a brand. A trustee's half smile accompanied the phrase, "the institution's reputation." Langston sat quietly, listening. He realized this wasn't performance review. It was a brand protection exercise. The brand was designed for a certain kind of student, a certain kind of parent, a certain kind of teacher. He had simply stepped outside their invisible boundaries by doing his job. At the next faculty luncheon, Langston overheard two seniors mentioning his name in hushed tones. One whispered, "He gave Spencer a B. I heard his mum's not happy." The other shrugged. "He's the black teacher. Maybe that's part of it." The air crackled. Not first time he'd felt race hanging in the room, but this time it felt like a verdict. The lunch trays clattered. Laughter paused. No one looked at him. He felt the weight of legacy families talking about whether he was competent or conforming or not acceptable. Meanwhile, Genevieve Alton's campaign gathered momentum. Donation meetings, board dinners, whispers of non-renewal of contracts, murmurs among donors. He discovered through posted minutes that the board had discussed parental satisfaction, an alignment with institutional values, in relation to teaching practices. No mention of Spencer's paper, or standards or fairness. Only image, alignment, and risk. The phrase risk echoed like a threat. He realized the institution's priorities were not about truth, learning, or equity, but about avoiding trouble from the glossy circles his critic inhabited. Langston went home that night, moved his box of personal items from school, and sat on his small couch scrolling through emails. One message stood out, sent anonymously. "Your performance is under review. We need to ensure nothing disturbs the harmony." His heart sank. Harmony. It did not refer to academic freedom. It referred to an illusion of peace, where power went unchecked. He realized the school expected him to blend in, to teach without rocking chairs of discomfort, and to vanish if he refused. It dawned on him, he wasn't just being challenged because of one student grade. He was being asked to play a role he never auditioned for, the compliant black teacher, unnoticed and silent. One afternoon, he met with Miss Tilda Reyes, the assistant principal who had contacted him days earlier. She closed the door, sat him down, and slid a small flash drive across the desk. I started recording meetings after I overheard comments about you during board sessions, she said quietly. I think you're being set up. What you're dealing with isn't normal. Langston's hands trembled as he took the drive. The twist shook him. The system wasn't just passively protecting the Altons. It was actively gathering ammunition against him, preemptively preparing narratives of disruption and bias, so that when they acted, they wouldn't need justification, only optics. In the next few days, things changed imperceptibly. His email account was locked for system maintenance. The job of grading was reassigned. The school's communication department drafted a memo praising diversity of instruction, but assuring parents that oversight would be enhanced. He sat in his living room, watching a local news clip about private school rankings, and heard his employer's name mentioned in the same breath as elite in tradition. The image of Langston being reviewed flickered on the screen, his face neutral, his name under the headline Teacher Controversy. The institution didn't call to warn him. They didn't defend him. They announced reviews and let the story leak. On Friday evening, 2 trustees sent invitations for private donor dinners with agenda points, including review of curriculum direction and donor perspectives. A single line stood out: teacher concerns. Langston understood. They were discussing him without him. His name was never spoken, only implied. His fate decided while he taught a class, graded a paper, and sought to change lives. The next morning, Langston returned to campus zipped below the radar. He avoided the lounge, passed by friendly nods or cold silence. He walked to his classroom. The door stood slightly ajar. On the door, someone had taped a sticky note. Thank you for your service. He paused. Thank you for your service. To what? To their world, to their comfort, to their prejudice? He entered, sat behind his desk, and watched the empty room. He thought of his mother's voice, years ago, reminding him that teaching wasn't just about imparting knowledge, it was about sowing dignity. He realized now that perhaps the lesson he was meant to teach wasn't just to his students, but to the system itself. In his inbox, a new message waited. From the headmaster. Subject line: meeting today, boardroom 3:30 p.m. No further details. Langston knew stepping into that meeting meant something far larger than defending a grade. He was going to face the machinery of tradition and reputation, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Langston pushed the end of his chair back, rose and walked toward the boardroom door. Just as he reached for the handle, the flash drive in his pocket vibrated. A new file had been added, titled Board Audio. He swallowed hard, but did he dare plug it in? And if he did, would he unleash something he couldn't control? Langston sat in boardroom 3 with the unplayed audio file still vibrating in his coat pocket like a ticking truth. He hadn't yet opened it. There was something terrifying about hearing your fate recorded in someone else's voice. For now, he focused on the people across from him, faces that used to greet him in passing, now stiff, unreadable, corporate. The meeting had gone as expected, platitudes layered over thinly veiled pressure. Concerns have been raised. Certain parents are losing confidence. We need to think about the bigger picture. They never said the word race. They didn't have to. Afterwards, Langston returned to the faculty lounge. The change was instant. Where before there had been nods and casual jokes over coffee, there was now a polite, crushing silence. Mr. Henley, who once shared curriculum strategies with Langston weekly, suddenly had nothing to say. Miss Dart, the science teacher who had once told him she admired his teaching method, now avoided his gaze. Even the copy machine seemed to hum louder in his isolation. The worst part wasn't the hostility. It was the disappearance. A quiet, suffocating erasure that made him feel like a shadow in his own workplace. At the next faculty meeting, the air was sharper. Langston entered 5 minutes early. Only 2 seats remained, both on the far end of the U-shaped table. He took one, placing his notepad down without a sound. Conversations continued without him. When Headmaster Burke arrived, he began with school-wide announcements, but soon veered toward curriculum standards. We must ensure, he said, eyes scanning the room but never stopping on Langston, that our classrooms reflect a balanced approach to material. We must avoid texts or perspectives that may unbalance the student experience. It was said with such administrative elegance that the intent almost slid by unnoticed. Langston raised his hand slowly. What does unbalance the student experience mean in practice? A long pause. Some faculty shifted in their chairs. Burke smiled thinly. It means we must be cautious of materials that push singular viewpoints, especially politically or socially charged ones. Langston pressed, voice calm. Are you suggesting that discussing racial dynamics in American literature is now considered unbalanced? I'm suggesting, Burke replied, that we ensure inclusivity by avoiding materials that alienate. Langston's voice didn't rise. Is alienation caused by the material or by the discomfort of confronting history? The silence that followed was louder than any reply. After the meeting, Miss Crenshaw brushed past him in the hallway. Why can't you just stop pushing? She muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. Langston stopped walking. Pushing what? She turned. Eyes narrowed. You know what I mean. You're making everything harder for the rest of us. The parents are angry. Admin is tense. Some of us just want to do our jobs. Langston stared at her. So do I. She scoffed. Then maybe stop acting like you're always the victim. It hit harder than he expected. Not because of what she said, but because it confirmed something he'd suspected for weeks. They weren't just distancing themselves from him, they were blaming him. In the following days, faculty group chats continued, without him. He wasn't removed, just quietly excluded. Threads that once buzzed with collaboration now passed him by. His questions went unanswered, suggestions ignored. Department head Branson told him that some discussions were moved offline for efficiency. Langston nodded, knowing exactly what that meant. Emails from students still trickled in. Some were supportive, others carried a tone cold accusatory, as though Langston's presence was the real disruption in their education. Even the janitor, Benji, who had always greeted him with a grin, now kept his eyes low. One morning, Langston tried to initiate small talk. Benji offered a half smile, then mumbled, I don't want trouble, Mr. Myles. A turning point came on a Thursday. A faculty workshop was held on equity and inclusion in the classroom. Ironically, Langston wasn't invited, at least, not directly. He only heard about it through a forwarded calendar link from a sympathetic teacher's assistant. He showed up anyway. When he entered the media center, the air shifted again. Conversations paused. Burke's eyes narrowed slightly. Genevieve Alton, in her role as parent-trustee liaison, sat prominently near the front, legs crossed, pearls gleaming. The guest speaker, a well-meaning consultant, opened with buzzwords and corporate lingo. Bias is like software, she said cheerfully. We all have bugs. The goal is to update. Langston listened, arms folded. Halfway through, an anonymous case study was presented. A hypothetical scenario about a teacher accused of favoritism after assigning controversial readings. The parallels were unmistakable. Langston spoke. I'd like to address that scenario, he said clearly. The room turned. If a teacher grades fairly, assigns reputable texts, and teaches with integrity, but the discomfort comes from challenging power, is that still bias? Or is it resistance to truth? The silence was visceral. Even the guest consultant paused. Unsure. Genevieve's voice rose lightly. Perhaps it's not about truth. Perhaps it's about perception, and how students feel in a classroom matters just as much. Langston replied without missing a beat. Especially when those feelings are challenged by unfamiliar truths. A few eyes around the room flickered with something. Curiosity? Support? But it died quickly under the weight of the status quo. That evening, Langston sat alone at his desk, the school nearly empty. The sun cast long shadows on his whiteboard. He finally pulled out the flash drive Tilda Reyes had given him. He clicked open the file. Board audio sep. Voices crackled through cheap speakers. We need to control this quietly. If we push him out, we need a narrative that won't raise alarms. What if he files a lawsuit? We'll cite misalignment. No one wants to be accused of racism, but no one wants an angry parent base either. Use his tone. Frame it as combative. We've done it before. Langston's stomach twisted. Not only had they planned his removal, they'd weaponized perception, packaging racism in the sterile language of HR compliance. He pressed play again. More voices. Laughter. Someone even joked. He probably thinks he's making a difference. Langston sat frozen. He wasn't paranoid. He wasn't imagining it. This was a system coordinated and rehearsed, cloaked in civility but laced with prejudice. He closed the laptop, heart pounding. The next morning, as Langston approached the staff parking lot, a voice called his name. He turned to see Tilda Reyes, eyes wide, breath short. You need to see this, she said, handing him a folder. Inside was a printed chain of internal memos. The latest one read, Begin process for voluntary resignation package. effective immediately. Langston looked up. They've already decided? Tilda nodded slowly. No, they want you to decide. Under pressure. But what they don't know is that someone just leaked this story to a journalist. Langston didn't sleep that night. The flash drive, the leaked memos, the pressure to quietly resign. Every piece of evidence screamed one thing. He was no longer a teacher in their eyes. He was a liability. A story they needed to manage, sanitize, and erase. But what he didn't know was that the storm outside Crestmore was already gathering strength. And it wasn't coming from inside the school. It was coming from social media, where truth was a casualty, and reputation could be obliterated by a single well-placed lie. The first post appeared just after sunrise. A local parent watchdog blog, followed mostly by affluent suburban mothers, published a thinly veiled hit piece titled, "When Teachers Push Too Far, a Crestmore Mother Speaks Out." The author, anonymous. The quotes, unverified, but the language was unmistakably Genevieve Alton. "My son came home in tears," the article claimed. "He felt targeted and belittled for simply being who he is. This teacher weaponized his classroom to make our children feel ashamed of their background." It didn't name Langston directly, but the clues were obvious: prestigious literature class, new diversity initiative, an educator with controversial reading lists. The post quickly made its way through the neighborhood Facebook groups, PTA WhatsApp chats, and even Twitter. Within 2 hours, it had been shared over 700 times. By noon, that number had tripled. It was no longer a story about a grade. It was a story about a radical teacher poisoning young minds, the kind of narrative suburban parents devoured without asking for receipts. Langston's phone buzzed non-stop. Missed calls, unread messages, screenshots from former students, headlines twisting faster than he could blink. Parents raise concerns over literature teachers' methods. Private school faces backlash over divisive curriculum. Should politics stay out of the classroom? No one called him for a quote. No journalist knocked on his door. They ran with the version fed to them, crafted by a wealthy mother with connections and an agenda. Langston stared at the articles. One tweet, with over 20,000 likes, read, "I pay too much in tuition for my kid to be lectured about white guilt by someone who hates our history. This is why private schools need to wake up." He didn't recognize the name. He didn't recognize any of the names. But they were talking about him. And worse, they believed they knew him. By the end of the day, Crestmore issued a public statement. It was brief, cold, corporate. "We are aware of recent concerns raised regarding one of our faculty members. We take student well-being seriously and are committed to fostering a safe, inclusive environment for all. As we investigate the matter, we ask for patience and discretion." They didn't name Langston. They didn't defend him either. In that silence, the public filled in the blanks with assumptions, lies, and outrage. Back at his apartment, Langston sat frozen at the kitchen table. His mother's photo, the one he kept near the window, stared back at him like an anchor. He remembered something she once told him: "The higher you climb, the quieter your allies get." He thought of his colleagues at Crestmore. Not one had publicly spoken up. Not Branson. Not Crenshaw. Not even Even Tilda, who had shared the evidence, hadn't returned his last call. He couldn't blame her. The system they all lived in had rules, and rule 1 was, don't protect what can't protect you back. He scrolled again. Another tweet appeared, more aggressive than the last. "If this teacher hates white kids so much, maybe he should have taught at a public school where this garbage is welcomed." That tweet had over 50,000 likes. His chest tightened. He hadn't left his apartment all day. Part of him feared he wouldn't be safe if he did. The next blow came by email. Langston opened his laptop to find a message from a publishing house he'd submitted an essay 2 months ago. They had accepted it then, a piece titled, "Teaching Baldwin in the Age of Division." It had been set to appear in an upcoming issue on pedagogy and race. Now, the message read, "Given the current controversy surrounding your name, we are reevaluating all pending publications. At this time, we are withdrawing your essay from our winter lineup." Just like that, years of work and thought, erased by a blog post and some hashtags. Langston leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He was being scrubbed, sanitized from the narrative. Not proven wrong, not found guilty, just removed. And all it took was a few clicks, a powerful last name, and the kind of reputation that could afford to lie. But he wasn't entirely alone. That night, his former student Amaya posted her own story. A long thread titled, What they're saying about Mr. Myles is a lie. Here's the truth. She wrote about how he made her feel seen, about how she learned to speak up in his class, about how his teaching helped her navigate being the only black student in 3 AP classes. Her thread gained traction, slowly at first, then exponentially. For every parent that screamed indoctrination, there were now students and graduates pushing back. Mr. Myles changed the way I think. He's the reason I'm in college. They're not mad about the content. They're mad about the color of who's teaching it. And then came the message that changed everything. A producer from a nationally recognized news show, Insight Weekly, reached out to Langston via email. We'd like to give you the chance to tell your side of the story. We've seen the footage. We know there's more to this. Footage. Langston sat upright. Had Tilda sent them the recordings? He opened the attached file. It was a snippet, less than 30 seconds. But it was damning. It showed Headmaster Burke in a closed meeting, saying, "If we frame this as insubordination rather than bias, we'll face less blowback." Langston exhaled. Now there was proof, not just of the racism, but of the strategy behind it. As Langston clicked on the second file labeled Genevieve Audio, a new email popped up from Crestmore Academy's legal team. Subject: immediate cease and desist, breach of confidentiality. They were trying to silence him again, but this time, the world was finally listening.
Langston hadn't responded to the cease and desist. Not immediately. He read the letter 3 times. Heart pounding, trying to decipher the legal jargon crafted to intimidate. It was meant to remind him of his place, not just in the school but in society, that for people like him, visibility was a risk, truth was dangerous, and survival too often meant silence.
But Langston wasn't silent now. The files from Tilda, the recordings, the memos, the coordinated campaign, were undeniable. For the first time, the outrage wasn't just coming from those with hashtags and anonymity. It was coming from students, alumni, even a few brave faculty members. His name was becoming a symbol, and that terrified the people who had worked so hard to erase him. That's when they turned to something else. His past. It started with a whisper. A post on a local forum suggesting Langston had controversial political views in college. A vague claim that he had once refused to stand for the pledge during his student teaching rotation. Then a screenshot surfaced, taken from a 15-year-old Facebook post, showing Langston at a protest following the shooting of an unarmed black teenager. The caption read, "Tired of begging to breathe." Within hours it went viral. Suddenly, Langston was no longer just the biased teacher. Now he was a known activist, a radical, a threat to classroom neutrality. They didn't need context. They had a photo, a protest sign, and melanin. That was enough to frame him. Crestmore didn't address the resurgence of these posts. But Langston noticed something chilling. The school's official website quietly updated his faculty profile, removing his biography, deleting his professional photo, and eventually taking the page down entirely. He no longer existed in their public image. The blog that had first attacked him published a new story. Why was this teacher ever hired? It questioned his entire career, quoting unnamed sources that described him as difficult, ideologically aggressive, and disrespectful to authority. They quoted his graduate thesis out of context, twisted his words, claimed he had a history of stirring controversy in academic spaces. What they never mentioned were the awards, the student testimonials, the journal publications, the kids who'd said he changed their lives. But that wasn't the point. They didn't want balance. They wanted an exit strategy, and his skin made that easier to justify. Langston met with a civil rights attorney, Renee Wallace, in a small office downtown. She was sharp, measured, and had represented dozens of teachers in similar fights. She listened as he laid out everything. The timeline, the emails, the recording. When he finished, she leaned back and said, "They're not just trying to fire you. They're building a character assassination in real time. They want to ruin your credibility so badly, you won't be able to teach again." Langston nodded slowly. "Why me?" She didn't sugarcoat it. "Because you're educated, outspoken, and black. You don't fit the mold they're comfortable with. That's always been a threat." He thought about that on the way home. How years of hard work, clean records, passionate teaching, respect for the craft, could be undone by a single photo and the right lie. The next day, another blow landed. A major media outlet, one that had previously ignored the story, published a feature titled, "When Woke Teachers Go Too Far." It used him as the poster child. Despite including no verified misconduct, The article leaned heavily on opinion pieces, resurfaced posts, and anonymous parent quotes. His inbox filled with hate, messages that said he deserved what was coming, that he was ruining kids with anti-American trash. One message simply said, "Know your place." Langston stared at those 3 words. They weren't new, they were generational, echoes from plantations and courtrooms and school boards. But they still stung like a fresh wound. At night, he barely slept. Every creak outside his apartment felt like a threat. Every headline drained him. Even stepping outside for groceries became a risk, one he didn't always have the energy to take. But amidst the firestorm, something unexpected happened. His former college professor, Dr. Amari Cates, published a powerful op-ed titled "I Taught Langston Myles. Here's What They're Getting Wrong." She dismantled the accusations point by point, cited his academic excellence, highlighted his commitment to truth. It was shared thousands of times. Then came a group of former students, 25 in all, who wrote an open letter of support, signed and published in the local paper. And slowly, something shifted. The narrative didn't disappear, but it fractured. The public saw 2 stories now, one of fear and spin, and one of courage and truth. Langston clung to that. But as he sat at his desk one evening, reviewing legal drafts with Renee, a message came through from an unknown email. It had no subject, just an attachment, labeled "Offer Confidential Myles." He opened it. A resignation contract, signed by Crestmore's lawyers. It offered a year's salary in exchange for silence. No lawsuit, no interviews, no recordings released. Langston stared at the document, jaw clenched. His future teaching, credibility, safety could be bought for a paycheck. But just as he scrolled to the signature line, another email pinged in. This one from a National Civil Rights Foundation. Subject line: "We saw your story. We'd like to help you take this public and national." Langston didn't respond to either email that night. He stared at them both, one offering a golden parachute in exchange for silence, the other a lifeline to something louder, riskier, and far more dangerous. One promised peace, the other promised war, but neither could promise his life back, not the one he had before that bee changed everything. He shut his laptop and closed his eyes. The ache behind them was less about fatigue now, and more about where. The deep, hollow erosion that comes from constantly defending your own legitimacy. Every room he walked into, every opinion he held, every lesson he taught, all of it was now interpreted through the lens of suspicion. And yet, there was one truth no one had dared say aloud. Spencer Alton had plagiarized his final paper. Langston had seen the signs from the beginning. Clumsy transitions, sentences, with vocabulary too advanced for Spencer's previous work. Paragraphs lifted nearly verbatim from a think piece published online a year ago. The kicker? The original source had been cited, but not by Spencer. He hadn't even attempted to paraphrase, just copy and paste. Langston had run the paper through 2 plagiarism tools. Both confirmed it. 62% match. He had documented everything, saved the results, emailed himself a time-stamped report. Still, he hadn't filed a formal academic dishonesty report. Not that.
Why?
Because he already knew what would happen. In schools like Crestmore, plagiarism wasn't academic dishonesty, not when it came from students like Spencer. It was miscommunication, misunderstanding, a lapse in citation. There were kids who had been caught cheating multiple times and still landed spots at Ivy League schools because their parents knew how to make conversations disappear. Langston had simply marked the paper down, a B, which in that context was mercy. But mercy had backfired. The morning after the resignation offer arrived, Genevieve Alton released a public statement, not through her personal account, but through the school's parent council.
It was bold, calculated,
Framed as a clarification in response to misinformation circulating online. "My family has always supported education and diversity in our community. However, recent attacks against us have been rooted in falsehoods. We believe in fair evaluation and open discourse. What concerns us is the behavior and unprofessionalism demonstrated by Mr. Langston Myles during his time at Crestmore, including allegations of favoritism, classroom hostility, and refusal to engage with parental concerns in good faith." It spread like wildfire. Once again, the same narrative re-emerged. Langston wasn't the problem, but he was difficult, divisive, angry. Not one mention of Spencer's plagiarism. Not one parent asked, why was Spencer's paper flagged in the first place? Not one trustee asked, Could this be about academic integrity, not race? No, because they had already chosen their story. Langston met with Renee in person. That afternoon, she didn't flinch as he read Genevieve's statement aloud. Classic strategy, she muttered. Aggress the victim, reframe the context, and shift the blame. Langston tapped the plagiarism report he'd printed out. This should be enough, right? Renee looked him dead in the eyes. Enough to be right, not enough to be heard. Not in a school like that. Not with her name and her money. He nodded slowly, but she added, that doesn't mean we don't use it. By that evening, Langston made a decision. He forwarded both emails, the resignation offer and the National Foundation's invite, to Renee, attached the plagiarism evidence, copied in the audio files, and added one final note. It's time. That same night, the Foundation's media team scheduled a filmed interview, professional crew, legal vetting, national syndication, and full control over the narrative. It would air in 5 days. But Crestmore wasn't finished. 2 days later, as the filming wrapped, Langston received an email from the Academic Integrity Committee, a body that had never once contacted him in 10 years of teaching. They wanted to discuss a complaint, one filed not against Spencer, but against Langston. According to the message, a parent had alleged that Langston had failed to notify Spencer of plagiarism allegations in a timely manner, and therefore violated the student's right to due process. Langston stared at the screen in disbelief. They were turning the accusation inside out, using the lack of an official report as proof of misconduct. He forwarded it to Renee. Her reply came fast. They're building a second front. First character, now procedure. They're trying to discredit you before the broadcast. He paced his apartment for over an hour. Memories of Spencer's smug smirk in class, Genevieve's smirking power plays, and the look in Burke's eyes the day they told him to reconsider the rubric. Now it all made sense. They weren't defending a student. They were protecting a system that rewarded silence and punished integrity. But just as the pressure mounted, a break came from an unlikely source. An internal email chain was leaked to a journalist at the Ledger, a reputable investigative outlet. It included correspondence between Genevieve, Burke, and several trustees, including a message where Genevieve admitted to reviewing Spencer's paper before submission and tweaking the conclusion herself. The leak hit the internet the next morning. Headlines flipped overnight. Crestmore cover-up? Parent admits to editing son's schoolwork. New emails reveal racism behind teacher smear campaign. The tide was turning. Suddenly, Genevieve's credibility was under scrutiny. The very thing she feared, public embarrassment, had arrived. And this time, it wasn't a black teacher who was blamed. It was her. Langston watched the chaos unfold from his apartment. Social media lit up. Public opinion split. Some still clung to old prejudices, asking why he hadn't reported it properly. But many others, especially students, teachers of color, and education advocates, saw it for what it was, a cover-up built on privilege, racism, and fear. And as the final blow, Renee shared something new. A faculty member, anonymous for now, had sent in another recorded clip, this one from a closed-door PTA meeting. Genevieve's voice rang clear. I don't care what he thinks is fair. My son isn't getting a B from some diversity hire with a chip on his shoulder. Langston sat in silence. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just breathed. Because for the first time in weeks, the mask was off, and the world was watching. The next morning, Crestmore issued a cryptic internal memo. Due to unfolding circumstances, all media interviews by current or former faculty are prohibited pending legal review. But it was already too late. That night, Langston's story would go live. And once it aired, the question wouldn't be whether he would speak, but whether Crestmore could survive what he said. The news broke before first period. Langston's interview, the one he filmed with the Civil Rights Foundation, aired on 3 major platforms the night before. Millions had seen it. Social feeds flooded with clips. Langston calmly recounting the plagiarism, the silent meetings, the recordings and the erasure. His voice was measured, but the pain behind his eyes said everything. The foundation had titled the video, "Erased the True Story of a Teacher." They tried to silence. And for the first time, Langston thought he might be free. But the world inside Crestmore Academy didn't change overnight. If anything, it recoiled. By mid-morning, students were already talking. Not in defense, not in outrage, in suspicion. Langston walked down the corridor and felt the shift immediately. Heads turned. Conversations clipped short as he passed. Even the kids he'd once helped, Those who stayed late for essays, asked him about Baldwin and Morrison, avoided his eyes now. He entered his classroom. A few students sat already, phones out. No one said hello. One boy, Miles, whispered to his friend, "He's the one from that video. The teacher who got cancelled or whatever." His friend responded, "I thought he was suing the school. Is he even allowed to be here?" Langston cleared his throat. "Phones away. We've got work to do." They obeyed, but slowly, slower than usual. Like they were measuring him now, unsure if he still held authority. He couldn't blame them. In a world where black excellence is always treated as conditional, reputation was everything. And when it cracked, even just once, the pieces weren't glued back. They were swept under the rug. Later that day, Langston found a note on his desk. No name, just bold handwriting on torn notebook paper. "Why don't you just quit? Nobody trusts you anymore." He stood still, holding the note like it might bite. His fingers trembled. He looked around the classroom. The walls, once lined with student art and literary quotes, now felt colder, bare, stripped. Even the room itself seemed unsure if it was allowed to respect him anymore. He slipped the note into his briefcase. Not for evidence, just to remember. Because this was the part no one ever filmed. The aftermath. The ghosting. The looks. The way black professionals were expected to survive the accusation, but never fully return once cleared. In the cafeteria, whispers buzzed louder. Two girls at a corner table were scrolling on their phones. One of them, Jade, frowned and asked, "Did you see the Reddit post? Someone said he faked the whole thing to get famous." Langston passed behind them. Neither noticed. He wasn't even a person anymore. Just a narrative. By the end of the week, students were quietly pulling out of his elective. 4 dropped in a single day. One parent emailed the school, asking if Langston's controversial past made him emotionally fit to lead classrooms. He was copied by mistake. Or maybe not. The email ended with, "I don't want my daughter caught in the middle of some race war disguised as English class." He spent that evening rereading the open letter his students had published weeks ago. The support. The words. The gratitude. He clung to those paragraphs like a lifeline, reminding himself that truth had left a mark, even if scars followed. But the next morning, the rumors got louder. During second period, a student slipped into class late, flushed and wide-eyed. "Mr. Myles," she asked, "is it true you're being sued?" Langston looked up from his notes.
What?
"Someone said you're being countersued by Spencer's mom, that you edited the audio." The entire class went still. Langston closed his folder. "That's not true." But the post said. He held up a hand. "Rumors don't belong here. Facts do. If anyone has questions, ask me, directly." But no one did. Because when you're black and accused, even innocence sounds like defense, and no defense is ever enough. He stayed late after school that day, finishing his grades. The hallway was dark, empty. Then came a knock on the door. A soft one. He looked up to find Amaya standing there, the same student who had once written that viral thread defending him. She stepped in cautiously. "Can I sit?" He nodded. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Not for anything I did, but for what you're going through." Langston smiled weakly. "You shouldn't have to." She looked down. "I know, but I also know people are scared. Of you, of what you represent. They see you standing in a system that was never built for you. And now that you're talking back, they don't know what to do." He nodded slowly. "Neither do I. Someday." She stood up to leave, then paused. "You once said the truth isn't about who speaks it, but who listens. Just don't stop speaking." Langston watched her walk away. One student. One moment of clarity. It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. Then, just as he was locking his door, an email came through on his phone. Subject line, "Request for interview, National Education Weekly." He opened it. "We are publishing a feature on racial disparities in elite institutions. We believe your story has opened a door. We'd like you to be our cover profile." His breath caught. This wasn't just another article. This was national, visible, and loud. But just as he sat down to respond, his phone buzzed again. A blocked number. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" A woman's voice. Crisp. Familiar. "Mr. Myles, this is Rebecca Kessler, attorney for the Alton family. I'm calling to inform you that we are preparing a defamation lawsuit. Unless you retract all public statements made about Mrs. Alton and her son, This includes the plagiarism allegation. Langston didn't speak. She continued. You've been warned. Further action will be swift. The line went dead. Langston sat in silence, the weight of her threat wrapping around his chest. Across the room, his laptop screen still glowed with the open invitation from National Education Weekly. 2 choices, 1 voice. And now, a legal war. The question was, could he afford to keep fighting when the cost was rising by the day? Langston sat in the staff parking lot, long after the school emptied, the engine of his car off, his hands clenched around the steering wheel. He hadn't moved in nearly an hour. The silence was thick, broken only by the buzz of his phone still vibrating from the call that had rattled his resolve. Defamation. They were serious. They wanted to destroy him. Legally. Financially. Permanently. Genevieve's attorney had sounded calm, confident, utterly unaffected, because people like her always had lawyers on speed dial, institutions behind them, money to stretch every fight out until their opponent gasped for air and begged for peace. Langston didn't have that luxury. But what he did have, finally, was a voice. He opened his inbox and stared again at the interview request for National Education Weekly. The subject line still blinked with urgency. He clicked reply and typed 4 words. I'm ready. Let's talk. Within 15 minutes he received a response. The lead journalist, Maya Dalton, requested a face-to-face interview. We believe your story is pivotal, she wrote. But more than that, we believe the wrong questions have been asked. That line struck him. For months the school, the media, the parents, all had been obsessed with one question. What did Langston do? But Maya was asking something else. What if he wasn't wrong? They met 2 days later, in a quiet glass-walled conference room in a downtown studio. No cameras. Not yet. Just a recorder, a notepad, and a long wooden table between them. Maya was younger than Langston expected. Early 30s. Sharp-eyed and meticulous. She didn't rush. She didn't posture. She simply said, I've read everything. But I want to hear it from you. Langston leaned forward. He began from the beginning. Not with the grade, but with the atmosphere. The tension he felt from day one. The silence when he spoke up in meetings. The slow erosion of support. The trap. He didn't dramatize. He didn't editorialize. He laid it bare. How he taught with passion. How he graded fairly. How the moment his authority collided with white entitlement, the machine kicked in. Maya never interrupted. But when he paused after detailing the plagiarism and the backlash, she leaned in. Can I ask something you haven't been asked yet? Langston nodded. What do you think they were really afraid of? He exhaled, then said, without hesitation, that I would prove that excellence in black skin doesn't need permission and doesn't need to apologize. By the time they finished, the sun had dipped low behind the skyline. Maya closed her notebook. The story is going to upset a lot of people. Langston half smiled. It already has. But here's what I want to explore, she continued. Not just the racism, but the system that needs people like you to be wrong. That can't tolerate being challenged by someone who doesn't play the part. She stood. I'll send you a draft before we run it. But be prepared. For what? For the storm that comes after people start asking the real questions. The article published online 2 days later with the headline, The Teacher They Tried to Silence. What if Langston Myles was right all along? It was surgical, balanced, devastating. Maya didn't just defend him. She dissected the entire narrative. She interviewed former students, pulled academic records, referenced educational policy on grading discretion, and included screenshots from internal emails. But the most damning part wasn't a quote or a leak, it was the closing paragraph. If Langston Myles had been white, would a B on a student paper have led to a smear campaign, a legal threat and institutional erasure? Or would he still be teaching respected, unbothered, and quietly right? It was shared 3 million times in the first 24. Hashtags exploded. I stand with Langston. Truth in teaching. Not just a grade. Publications that had ignored the story began running op-eds. Podcasts reached out. Influencers picked it up. Even a few celebrities tweeted their support, calling the situation a reflection of how black professionals are punished for doing their jobs too well. Crestmore panicked. Within 48 hours, the school issued a new formal statement, this time naming Langston directly. Mr. Myles is no longer employed at Crestmore Academy. We thank him for his service and wish him well in future endeavors. There was no apology, no admission, just a line in the sand. But Langston wasn't finished. The next morning, He and Renee filed an official civil rights complaint against the school. Discrimination, retaliation, defamation, breach of contract. They included the audio files, the memos, the emails, and most critically, the leaked PTA recording, where Genevieve's words betrayed her racism without disguise. News outlets covered the filing live. Langston's face, once just a teacher in a classroom, now stared back from TV screens, podcast covers, and online panels. Not as a victim, not even just as a survivor, but as a challenger. He hadn't asked for this platform, but now that he had it, he planned to use it. But the twist came that afternoon. Langston received an anonymous tip via encrypted email. The subject line was chilling. There's a reason they're afraid of discovery. Attached were 3 scanned documents, Crestmore's internal diversity audit from the previous year. One page highlighted an alarming statistic. Only 3% of non-white faculty had received tenure offers in the past decade, and 100% of those who spoke up about inequity were later let go or discouraged from returning. The final page contained a handwritten note. They knew you were right. They just needed you gone before anyone else realized it too. Langston forwarded the email to Renee. She responded almost instantly. This changes everything. We're not just filing for you now. We're filing for a culture of discrimination. And that opens them to federal scrutiny. Langston sat back, pulse pounding. What had started with a B on a paper had become a mirror held up to a system that prided itself on prestige while rotting from within. He thought back to every moment he'd second-guessed himself. Every hallway where no one made eye contact. Every meeting where words like fit and tone and optics replaced the truth. Now none of that silence could protect them, because someone finally had asked the only question that mattered. Just as Langston prepared to close his laptop, another notification appeared. A new email from a blocked address. The subject line, "There's a video you haven't seen yet." Inside a link. No context. No sender. Only this. Watch before Monday. You'll understand why they pushed so hard to silence you. Langston's hand hovered over the link. The email was untraceable. No name, no signature, no metadata. Just a single line of text. Watch before Monday. You'll understand why they pushed so hard to silence you. He hesitated. This could be a trap. Another attempt to bait him, mislead him, or worse. But something about the phrasing felt familiar, intentional, like someone on the inside, once again had chosen to tip the balance. He clicked. A private Vimeo page opened. Password protected. Another message followed instantly in the same email thread. Password 7th floor cam truth. His heart raced as the video loaded. The screen opened to grainy security footage from a conference room. Langston immediately recognized. Boardroom A, on Crestmore's 7th floor, used exclusively for high-level administrative and donor meetings. The timestamp in the corner read, April 12. This was 2 weeks before the public backlash began. The footage had no audio, but the video quality was sharp enough to read lips and expressions. The room was full, Headmaster Burke, 3 trustees, and seated with perfect posture at the center. Genevieve Alton. Langston leaned forward as the camera angle shifted. Genevieve was standing now, gesturing forcefully with her hands. Her lips formed clear, deliberate words. This grade cannot stand. I don't care how he defends it. You will fix this. Burke sat still, hands folded. He said something inaudible, and Genevieve replied with a single sentence that made Langston's stomach turn. She leaned across the table, pointing at a printed document, likely Spencer's grade report, and said, If you don't handle him, I will. The room went silent. No one interrupted her. No one objected. Then came the moment that changed everything. Genevieve turned to one trustee and whispered, low enough that she clearly thought no one would hear. Spencer didn't even write the damn paper. I did. He doesn't have time for that nonsense. Not with recruitment season. Langston froze, rewound, played it again. Spencer didn't even write the damn paper. I did. There it was. The confession. The truth. Not just of plagiarism, but of fabrication. The entire scandal had been built on a lie, and she had admitted it, on video, with a smirk. She hadn't expected anyone to record her. She hadn't expected a leak. But someone had saved this. And now, Langston had it. He forwarded the video to Renee. Her call came within minutes. Langston, she said, breathless. This is nuclear. I know. This doesn't just clear you. It implicates her. The headmaster. The board. Everyone who allowed this cover-up to move forward after that meeting. He was silent. Then, do we go public? Renee exhaled slowly. Not yet. This goes straight to federal counsel. This isn't just civil litigation anymore. This is obstruction, falsification, and willful retaliation. Langston nodded, stunned at the magnitude. They'll deny it's real. They can try, Renee said, but it won't matter. This was on their property, their timestamp, their people, and she said it, clear as day. But even as hope stirred, Langston felt something else creeping in. Dread. Because this kind of exposure wasn't just career-ending for Genevieve and the board. It was legacy-shattering. And powerful people, especially ones used to moving without consequence, didn't crumble quietly. By the next morning, Langston received a call from a number he hadn't seen in weeks. Headmaster Burke. He let it ring, then answered. Mr. Myles, Burke said calmly. I believe it's in everyone's best interest to meet privately. Langston didn't respond. Burke continued. There are ways to resolve this, ways that don't require escalation. Let's not burn down something we've all worked hard to build. Langston's voice was quiet. You mean silence it? A long pause. We're prepared to offer a revised settlement, with significantly more favorable terms. Langston almost laughed. Now you want to negotiate? We can avoid the media frenzy. You still have a future. Don't let it be consumed by bitterness. Langston hung up, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he smiled without restraint. Later that afternoon, as he walked into Renee's office, she was already on the phone with federal investigators. She looked up at him, her expression firm. They've opened an inquiry. DOJ wants to see the full file by end of day. They're especially interested in the video. Does this mean? It means we're not just suing a school, she said. We're exposing a protected culture of educational gatekeeping. Langston sat down slowly. They'll deny. They'll threaten. They already are, Renee said. I got 3 anonymous messages this morning. But it doesn't matter. Because now we have their fingerprints. She slid a folder toward him. Inside, legal filing papers, whistleblower protection forms, and a list of national networks requesting interviews. Langston didn't feel victorious. He felt vindicated. There was a difference. That evening, Crestmore held a private emergency board meeting. They didn't know Langston had a source inside. Someone who had quietly passed him the meeting agenda. Item 1. Address unauthorized media leak. Item 2. Discuss reputational risk assessment. Item 3. Review contract clauses for faculty privacy violations. They were circling the wagons. Genevieve had gone silent. No press appearances, no statements. But her legal team was reportedly working overtime. It didn't matter. The footage had already been backed up, time-stamped, and reviewed by 2 independent law firms. It was real. It was damning. And it was spreading. But just when Langston thought the worst was behind him, a new headline dropped from a national paper that had stayed quiet until now. Elite schools and the racial double standard. The Langston Myles case is only the beginning. The article included anonymous testimony from 4 other black educators across the country who had experienced eerily similar treatment, from false accusations to whispered discrediting campaigns. Langston read every word. And then, at the bottom of the article came a short sentence that chilled him. A source close to the DOJ investigation says federal subpoenas may extend to multiple schools and private education associations. This wasn't just about Langston anymore. It was becoming a movement. As Langston stood by his apartment window, watching the dusk settle over the city, his phone buzzed with one final notification. An email, marked urgent from a local news anchor. The subject line read, "We have a copy of the full video. Genevieve is demanding airtime. She says she'll tell her side and bring receipts. Are you prepared?" Langston knew the moment it hit the internet. He didn't need a call from Renee, or a headline alert from one of the national outlets. He could feel it, the sudden swell of noise, the digital pulse that follows when a secret too big to stay buried finally breaks free. His phone buzzed 5 times in under a minute. By the 10th buzz, he already knew it wasn't about the board footage. That bomb had gone off days ago. This was new, louder, messier. The subject line from Tilda Reyes read only, "You need to see this. It's everywhere." Langston opened the link and hit play. The video started mid-meeting. A PTA gathering at Crestmore, held just weeks before his suspension. The setting was familiar. The soft lighting, the circular table filled with expensive handbags, glossy coffee cups, and the kind of performative politeness that always made his skin tighten. At the head of the table sat Genevieve Alton, manicured, poised, her pearls gleaming like armor. Around her were 10 other mothers, the usual coalition of donors and concerned parents who believed their tuition bought veto power. The recording was captured from a phone tucked discreetly beneath a folder. The camera angle was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. A woman's voice spoke first. Maybe we should wait for the headmaster to address it formally. This is getting ugly online. Genevieve's laugh cut through the air, sharp and condescending. Ugly? Please. This is what happens when we give people like him too much power. A pause. Someone off camera asked, "People like him?" Genevieve's tone turned venomous. "Oh, don't act naive, Susan. You know exactly what I mean. The diversity hires always turn out the same. Too emotional, too opinionated, too eager to prove something." There was a collective inhale around the table. Someone whispered, "Genevieve," in a warning tone. But she continued. Louder now. "No, I'm saying what everyone else is too afraid to. My son worked hard to get here, and now some social justice teacher wants to humiliate him to make a point. I won't have it." Langston froze. Hearing her racism written across online threads was one thing. Hearing it raw, unfiltered, unedited, dripping from her mouth like poison, was another. The room in the video shifted uncomfortably. The camera caught glances between parents, faces torn between disapproval and silent agreement. Then Genevieve dropped the line that shattered her polished image. "He thinks he can teach our kids about struggle? He doesn't know struggle. He got lucky. A token with tenure."
The room went dead quiet.
Someone whispered, "You can't say that." Genevieve interrupted. "I just did. And I'll say it again. He doesn't belong here. Crestmore is about excellence, not experiments." Langston's hands tightened around his phone until his knuckles went white. He rewound the clip, played it again, then again. Each repetition made his heart ache less with anger and more with exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones. The kind that says, "I knew this was the truth all along, and now the world finally sees it too." He forwarded the recording to Renee. 2 minutes later she called. Voice electric. "Langston, do you realize what this is?" "Yes," he said quietly. "It's her mask slipping." "It's more than that," Renee replied. "It's confirmation, pattern, intent, systemic bias, all on record. This isn't just a civil case anymore. The DOJ will eat this alive." "Does it change anything for me?" he asked.
Everything.
She said. "Absolutely everything." By midday, the recording had been reposted thousands of times. The hashtags Genevieve exposed and Trestmore cover-up were trending nationwide. News anchors dissected every word of the audio. Pundits called it a window into American privilege. Students began organizing protests outside the school gates, holding signs that read "Education shouldn't be bought," and "Listen to Mr. Myles." Langston watched it all, from his apartment, numb. The noise around his name had changed pitch, from scandal to sympathy. But it wasn't vindication he felt. It was grief. Because every cheer, every supportive post, every viral clip, came with the reminder that the only reason the world finally believed him was because a white woman had been caught on camera saying the quiet part out loud. That evening, Crestmore released an emergency statement. "We are deeply disturbed by the content of the recently surfaced recording. Effective immediately, Mrs. Genevieve Alton has been removed from the Parent Advisory Council and all related committees. We are launching an independent investigation into institutional practices." Langston read it twice. Nowhere in the statement was there an apology to him. No admission of wrongdoing. Just damage control. He closed the article. The hum of city noise outside his window barely audible beneath the dull roar in his head. His phone rang again. This time from an unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Myles?" It was Maya Dalton, the journalist who had written the "What If He Wasn't Wrong" piece. Her voice carried that blend of calm and adrenaline reporters get when the story's still burning hot. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "The person who recorded the PTA meeting, it wasn't a parent, it was a faculty member." Langston blinked. "What?" "She stayed anonymous until now. But she's ready to go public. Said she's tired of the hypocrisy." Langston leaned forward. "Who is it?" Maya hesitated. "Tilda Reyes." He sank back in his chair. Tilda, the same assistant principal who had risked her job to leak those first recordings. The one who had warned him early on that something was wrong. "She says she has more," Maya continued. "Emails, Board meeting notes, texts between the trustees. She's offering them to you and the DOJ. She wants everything exposed. Langston's pulse quickened. Why now? Maya's voice softened. Because she says she can't sleep knowing she stayed quiet this long. By nightfall, the leaks had turned into a flood. Internal memos surfaced showing that the school board had met privately to preserve donor relations, instead of investigating the Altons' misconduct. Another document showed Burke himself instructing staff to minimize contact with Myles to avoid escalations. The house of cards was falling. And Genevieve, once Crestmore's untouchable queen, had gone silent. Until suddenly, she didn't. At 9:17 p.m., every major network received a press release from her legal team. She would hold a live press conference the next morning. The statement promised context, corrections, and undisclosed evidence of professional misconduct. Langston stared at the announcement on his screen. He should have felt fear, but he didn't. He felt clarity. For months, Genevieve had controlled the narrative through whispers, connections, and privilege. But tomorrow, she'd have to speak in front of cameras, and cameras, he'd learned, had a habit of telling their own truths. As the city lights flickered outside his window, Langston received a short text from Tilda. Tomorrow won't go how she thinks. Check your inbox before 8 a.m. He looked at the time, 11:52 p.m. The clock ticked louder than usual. Whatever waited for him in that inbox was going to end this story one way or another. The sun had barely risen when Langston sat back down at his desk. The inbox opened before him like a waiting confession booth. Tilda's message had arrived at exactly 7. No subject line, just a file attachment titled, Burke call transcript final. Langston hesitated, heart pounding. He clicked play. The recording began mid-sentence. Burke's voice rushed, tense. We can't let this get to litigation. Not with the foundation money watching. If he wants out, give him the settlement. Main DA silence clause. All of it. Then a female voice, possibly a board member. And if he doesn't accept, then we make it look like we offered peace. That's enough to sway public opinion. It'll split the narrative. Langston paused the audio. There it was. The proof. The playbook laid out with corporate calm. Silence wasn't about resolution. It was about strategy. He forwarded the file to Renee with one sentence. We go public. Today. At 10:00 a.m., Genevieve stood before a wall of microphones outside her attorney's office, flanked by two men in suits and an expression of forced poise. Langston watched from his apartment, live feed streaming on his laptop, Tilda's leaked files in a folder beside him. Genevieve opened her statement carefully. The recent narratives surrounding my family have been deeply hurtful and largely inaccurate. I want to clarify that at no point did I intend to suggest that Mr. Myles was unfit to teach. However, as a mother, I acted out of concern when my son expressed discomfort in his classroom. Langston blinked, baffled by the restraint in her tone. It was deliberate, the measured damage control of someone coached by PR professionals. She wasn't denying everything. She was reframing it. Then came the twist. Genevieve claimed that Spencer had, in fact, written the paper, with some oversight, and that Langston had failed to give him a chance to revise. She painted the situation as a miscommunication, exaggerated by media manipulation. Langston's jaw tightened. She wasn't trying to clear herself. She was trying to muddy the water just enough to confuse the public. The press conference ended without questions. Her team quickly ushered her inside. The networks panned back to anchors already preparing commentary. Langston closed the screen. It was time. An hour later, he and Renee stepped into the studio of National Education Weekly for a live televised interview. This time with full legal protection and all the receipts in hand. Maya Dalton sat across from him, calm but visibly bracing for impact. We've just heard Mrs. Alton's official statement, she began. Before we continue, Mr. Myles, are you ready to respond? Langston took a breath. I'm not here to attack a parent, he said. I'm here to tell the truth, and I won't be silenced, not by wealth, not by strategy, and not by fear. He opened the folder beside him and pulled out a printed transcript. This is a recorded call between Headmaster Burke and board members, discussing how to control this narrative. In it, they refer to me not as a teacher or a person, but as a liability. They offered me money. A settlement. A full year's salary if I signed away my voice. The camera cut to Maya's shocked face. And did you consider taking it? She asked. Langston looked directly into the lens. Yes. For 5 seconds. Because it would have made the noise go away. But then I remembered every student who told me they felt invisible. Every colleague who warned me to just play along. I remembered that silence has never protected people who look like me. It only protects those who benefit from our disappearance. The studio was silent. Langston continued. What this was never about was a grade. It was about control. And when I didn't fold, they came for everything. My job, my reputation, my safety. He paused. But what they didn't count on was that I wasn't alone. He held up the flash drive, the one containing the call, the PTA video, the email leaks, the memo from Genevieve admitting she'd rewritten the paper. This is the truth. And they tried to bury it with money. By 3:00 p.m., Langston's interview had gone viral. Within hours, the media reassembled the full picture. The plagiarism, now undeniably proven. The PTA recording, played on national networks. The settlement offer verified by 2 independent legal experts. Genevieve's own contradictions on tape. The court of public opinion was no longer split. It was stunned. A new hashtag emerged. Buy Silence Fail. Under it, educators across the country began sharing their own stories. The pressure to stay quiet. The subtle punishments for pushing equity. The silence demanded in exchange for stability. Langston wasn't just a teacher anymore. He was a symbol. Later that evening, Langston received a direct call from a federal education official. We'd like to formally invite you to testify during our upcoming congressional hearing on institutional discrimination in private schools. Langston didn't hesitate. I'll be there. But just when it seemed like the walls were finally closing in on Crestmore and the Alton family, another email arrived. This time it was from a law firm representing multiple parents, not just the Altons, claiming Langston had created a hostile environment and that they were pursuing a civil suit for emotional distress. Langston forwarded it to Renee without blinking. Her reply was simple. It's desperation. They know the house is falling, so they're trying to bring you down with it. But even she didn't expect what came next. That night, as Langston stepped out for the first time in weeks to get groceries, he noticed a flyer pinned to a community board near the market.
His face.
Underneath, in all caps, dangerous ideology masquerading as education. Someone had printed and posted it anonymously. He took it down, folded it in half, and walked back to his car without saying a word. Because even with the truth laid bare, even with power shifting, the backlash was far from over. As he placed his keys in the ignition, another alert lit up his phone. This time it was a voicemail transcription from an unknown number. You think this is over? You've made enemies you don't even know exist yet. Stay out of Crestmore. Stay out of education. Or we'll finish what we started. Langston sat frozen. The truth was out, but now the real danger had begun. The courtroom was colder than Langston expected. Not physically, the air conditioning was barely on, but in the way the room felt deliberately sterile. Everything was beige. The walls, the carpet, the faces of the 12 jurors, half of whom looked like they'd never once had to question the comfort of their own reputation. Langston sat at the plaintiff's table, beside Renee, his hands folded, his breath steady. Across from him, flanked by a phalanx of attorneys in tailored suits, sat Genevieve Alton, hair pulled tight, pearl earrings in place, her expression blank, controlled, but her eyes couldn't hide the tremble. Not today, because the cameras were rolling now. The courtroom gallery was filled. Journalists filled the back row. Civil rights observers had flown in from across the country, and for the first time Genevieve Alton didn't get to write the narrative. The trial had been expedited due to public pressure and federal interest. Langston's legal team had filed on grounds of defamation, retaliation, and malicious intent with racial animus. And with the mounting evidence, the court had granted a fast-track hearing. It wasn't just about Langston anymore. This was a trial for every teacher who had been erased in silence, for every black professional made to feel like a guest at their own table. Renee stood for opening remarks, her voice calm but thunderous. We are not here today because Mr. Myles was wrong. We are here because he was right, and because a system built to favor those who could donate more than they could teach decided that being right while black was too dangerous. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense tried their best. Genevieve's lead counsel, a silver-haired man with a voice like warm syrup, tried to shift the trial into something abstract. This is about miscommunication, he said, about how a mother's concern for her child spiraled in a digital age. But the evidence crushed every attempt at dilution. The audio recordings played first. Burke's voice, the trustees, the plan to silence Langston with settlements. Then came the PTA video. Genevieve's voice, sharp and cruel, saying, "He doesn't belong here." Then came the final blow. The boardroom confession, her brag that she wrote Spencer's paper herself. Every word filled the room like smoke. Genevieve avoided eye contact with the jury the entire time. Then it was Langston's turn to take the stand. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't cry. He simply told the story of showing up to teach students how to think, of being ignored until he challenged the wrong name, of being discredited, ghosted, threatened. "I gave a student a B," he said simply, "because that's what he earned. That's what I've done for every student I've taught, regardless of their race, legacy, or last name." He looked directly at the jury. What happened after that wasn't about a grade. It was about control. "I didn't lose my job because I was unfair. I lost it because I refused to play the part they expected from me." The room went silent. Even Genevieve shifted. For a moment Langston saw it. The flicker of realization. Not remorse, but exposure. Her world, once gated and safe, was now on display. Then came the twist. Renee called Tilda Reyes as a witness. The defense objected, irrelevant, they claimed. The judge allowed it. Tilda took the stand and recounted every memo, every hallway whisper, every silencing directive. She confirmed the culture, the pressure to conform, the backdoor meetings that buried complaints from faculty of color. And then she dropped the final nail. "I was instructed," Tilda said, her voice steady, "to remove all references to Mr. Miles's student accolades from our website the day after the Altons filed their complaint. No review, no hearing, just erasure." The jury stirred. Genevieve's face stiffened, and still she said nothing. On the final day of testimony, Genevieve was called to the stand. She declined. Her lawyer answered on her behalf, citing emotional distress and ongoing threats. Langston watched her sit silently as the prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Alton, is it true you authored your son's final paper?" No response. "Do you deny being the voice in the PTA recording?" Still silent. "Do you believe Mr. Myles was unprofessional or simply unmanageable?" Silence. The courtroom waited. The judge repeated the question. Genevieve finally spoke, but not to answer. She turned to the jury, and for the first time in public, cried. Tears, real or rehearsed, it didn't matter. "I was just trying to protect my son," she said. "I never meant for it to become this." No apology. Just soft deflection wrapped in performative pain. Renee didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The jury had already heard everything they needed. The judge called for closing arguments the next morning. Renee's final statement was brief. "This is not about a grade. It's about the weaponization of influence, the convenience of erasure, and the quiet destruction of a man's life, because he wouldn't apologize for doing his job. This is about truth. And today you have the power to decide whether truth finally wins." The jury was dismissed. Langston left the courthouse with his head high, not because he knew what the verdict would be, but because he finally felt whole. 5 hours later, the jury returned. The judge read the verdict slowly. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Langston Myles." Langston exhaled. "We award damages in the amount of..." Gasps. "We further refer this matter for federal review regarding potential civil rights violations at Crestmore Academy." Complete silence. Langston didn't move. Neither did Genevieve. For the first time, her privilege couldn't protect her. Not in this room. Not against the truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashes. Questions. Applause from protesters who had gathered all week. Langston didn't speak at first. Then Maya Dalton asked the question that cut through the noise. "What's next for you, Mr. Myles?" He looked up, his voice calm. "I'm going back to the classroom. Maybe not at Crestmore. Maybe not even in a school building. But wherever students are taught to think critically. That's where I belong." As the crowd cheered and the cameras rolled, Langston's phone buzzed again. Another email. No sender, no subject. Just one sentence. "Crestmore's still hiding something, and this time it goes beyond you." The hallway smelled the same. Polished oak floors. Fresh lacquer. That soft, unmistakable scent of affluence. Subtle and curated, like someone had tried to bottle the idea of legacy. But this time, Langston Myles didn't walk through those double glass doors as a staff member. He walked in as a guest of honor. Exactly 1 year to the day since he'd been forced out. 1 year since they boxed up his desk, silenced his voice, and tried to smother the truth under money and manipulation. And yet now, The brass Crestmore plaque above the front entrance, the one he'd passed 1,000 times with uncertainty, glinted differently in the sunlight. This time, it didn't glare at him, it reflected him. The email had come from the interim head of school, Dr. Camille Wright, a woman he had never met before but had come to admire from afar. She'd been appointed following the court fallout, brought in as part of the structural overhaul after multiple trustees resigned and Headmaster Burke took early retirement. Dr. Wright's message had been short, direct and layered with quiet intent. We're rebuilding, but we can't do it without facing where we failed. We'd be honored if you'd speak to our students as part of our new equity lecture series. Langston had stared at the screen for a long time before replying. The school that once tried to erase him was now asking for his voice. He didn't agree right away. Not because he was bitter, though he'd earned the right to be, but because forgiveness for black professionals often came only after a public shaming, only after humiliation turned into headlines, only after the institution felt the heat, not the heartache. But after a week of thought and 2 conversations with Renee and Tilda, he responded with a single word: yes. The drive back to Crestmore was quiet. Langston passed the same security gate, the same tree-lined drive, the same bronze statue of the founder that once felt like a warning. But now the guards recognized him. One of them, a young black man no older than 25, stepped out of the booth and nodded with something deeper than courtesy. "Mr. Myles," he said, voice proud. "Been waiting for this day." Langston smiled. "So have I." Inside the main lobby, a banner hung above the entry hall. "Courage in the classroom." A conversation with Langston Myles. Students gathered in the auditorium, buzzing in low murmurs. Many of them hadn't been there the year before, but they'd heard the story, they'd seen the clips, they'd read the op-eds. And some of them, especially the black and brown students, knew what it meant to see him back here. Dr. Wright met him outside the auditorium doors. She extended her hand firmly. "Welcome back, Mr. Myles." Langston shook it. Her eyes didn't flinch. "This institution owes you more than time can repay. I hope today is a start." He nodded. "That depends on what happens after I leave." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they remember." Langston stepped onto the stage. The murmurs died instantly. The spotlight was soft, not blinding. He adjusted the mic once and looked out at the sea of faces. Young, uncertain, hopeful. Then he began. "I wasn't supposed to stand here again," he said, evenly. "A year ago, I was erased, not because I broke a rule, but because I followed it." A rustle in the crowd. Eyes widened. Not fear, just attention. "I graded fairly. I taught truthfully, and I refused to pretend that truth didn't have color, history, or consequence." He paused. "And for that, they tried to turn me into a problem." He let it sit, let them feel the discomfort. "But here's the thing about problems. They don't disappear just because you cover them up. They resurface louder, stronger, and more undeniable." He spoke about institutional silence, about coded language, about how terms like fit and professionalism were often used to excuse exclusion. He didn't call out names. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who had tried to bury him. He just said, "Privilege doesn't look like power until it's threatened by the presence of someone who earned their place without it." When he finished, the room erupted. But not in a cheer. In silence. A long, rising, weighty silence. The kind that means a room is processing not just what they heard, but what it cost to say it. Then, slowly, hands rose. Not applause. Questions. And Langston answered every single one. With patience. With clarity. With grace. Not because he owed it to them, but because truth, when held with dignity, becomes a weapon no smear campaign can dull. After the lecture, students lined up to speak with him. A freshman girl, black with glasses and a shaking voice, whispered, "They never say our names here. But today they had to say yours." Langston nodded, eyes misting. "And one day they'll say yours too." Another student, white, tall, nervous, said, "I believed everything they told us about you. And then I watched the trial. I'm sorry, you changed how I see everything." Langston looked at him for a long time, then said, "Changing your lens is harder than defending your comfort. Keep doing the hard thing." As the crowd thinned and the auditorium emptied, Langston walked alone through the faculty hallway. He passed his old classroom, now assigned to someone new. He peeked inside. The board had a Baldwin quote on it. The books on the desk were his old syllabi. He felt something twist in his chest. Not regret. Legacy. He turned to leave, But someone was waiting at the end of the hall. Spencer Alton. Older now. Taller. His expression unreadable. Langston stopped. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Spencer said, "I transferred schools last year. I didn't want to face what I let happen." Langston tilted his head. "But you're here now." Spencer swallowed hard. "I watched your speech. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For not speaking up. For lying. For being quiet when it mattered." Langston looked at him, and for the first time since all this began, he saw a boy trying to become a man. "You were taught that silence would protect you," he said. "Now you're learning it only protects the lie." Spencer nodded, eyes wet. "I'm still learning." Langston stepped closer. "Then keep showing up, and don't wait another year to do it." He exited the school building to a light drizzle, but the sky was open, not dark. Dr. Wright waited outside with a folded letter in her hand. "What's this?" Langston asked. "A vote," she said, "from the board." He opened it. Inside was a formal offer to return, not as a teacher, as the new director of equity and pedagogical integrity. Langston didn't respond immediately. He looked past her back at the building, then said softly, "Let me think about it." She nodded, smiling. "Take your time. Just know, the job isn't to fix the school. It's to make sure no one ever erases someone like you again." That night, Langston sat in his apartment, staring at the letter. His phone buzzed. Another anonymous email. Subject line: "You exposed the crack. But there's more. Crestmore's hiding test score suppression by race. Are you ready to keep going?" He clicked it open, and for the first time he didn't feel afraid. He felt ready, because now when they said his name, they said it with respect, and this time, they couldn't silence him again. They tried to erase him with lies, but the truth wouldn't stay buried, because dignity doesn't bow to privilege, and silence isn't peace, it's permission. If this story broke your heart like it did ours, subscribe to keep these voices alive. Type yes if you believe in justice.